Hello, welcome to the Dallas Bar Association's Living Legends. This is 2022, June, and it's a special Pride edition. My name is Cece Cox, and it's my absolute pleasure to be interviewing this month's Living Legend, Shelly Skeen. And I'd like to start out by telling you some of Shelly's accomplishments. The list is long, but I will try to get through quickly because I'm excited to ask some questions and hear what Shelly has to say about her accomplished career. So Shelly is a 1998 graduate of Texas Wesleyan University and was licensed by the Texas Bar in 1999, but being the achiever that she is, started working while she was waiting for her bar results, and she was a briefing attorney for the Texas State Appellate Court. Since 2001, she has been a certified mediator, and she also is an arbitrator. She has a diploma in international arbitration and actually the designation as a fellow from the Charters Institute of Arbitration. Shelly's practiced 23-ish years since we're midway through the year here, and was doing a number of other things before she came to the profession of law. But in her law practice has done complex litigation, including online free speech cases, business disparagement and defamation, probate and estate work, and in doing that, particularly found satisfaction in serving LGBTQ clients while she was developing that practice. She has appeared before the United States Supreme Court, the Texas Supreme Court, the Fifth Circuit, the Sixth, and the Seventh, the United States District Court in Texas, Michigan, and Illinois, and in many Texas appellate courts. She has served in many functions, both in the law profession and also with nonprofits. A partial list is being a member and an officer with the LGBT bar section of the State Bar of Texas, being the president of the Dallas LGBT bar section, and has served on the board of the Coalition for Aging LGBT here in Dallas, and currently is on the Juanita J. Craft Civil Rights House and Museum Board of Directors. Shelly serves currently on the State Bar of Texas CLE committee, helping us all learn and be inclusive in the offerings that are done by the State Bar of Texas. She is an adjunct faculty with NIDA, the National Institute of Trial Advocacy, and she's an adjunct teacher with the UNT Dallas School of Law. In 2017, Shelly left her law practice that she was with at the time, and she was a partner at BFS, and she decided to attend and was accepted into gladly and with distinction at the UCLA School of Law to pursue an LLM. And in 2018, she graduated from that program with a specialty in constitutional law and law and sexuality, also known as LGBTQ law. Then, after returning from UCLA, Shelly accepted a position and is a senior attorney with Lambda Legal, which is a national organization that does impact litigation for LGBTQ individuals and those living with HIV. And we're blessed in Dallas to have one of Lambda's regional offices, the South Central Regional Office. So I am stopping with your credentials and excited to have this conversation with you, Shelly. Also, as a matter of full disclosure, Shelly and I agreed that we should let everybody know. It just so happens that we're married. So if I have any particular insights or embarrassing things to say about Shelly, I have a particular knowledge of her background, but I'm kidding. I'm not going to do anything to embarrass you. So I'd like to start out by asking you, and welcome, it's great to have this conversation and share what you're about to share. What advice would you give to a new lawyer?
Yeah, and let me just say, I'm really, really grateful to be here today. This is a huge honor. I am humbled by it, and hopefully we can share some good information that folks will feel is helpful to them in their careers and helps us each see each other more clearly and to serve the clients that we have in our practices. So tell me the question again.
You bet. What advice would you give to a new lawyer? Because I know you have spent significant amounts of time, and that's something that's important to you, to either officially or unofficially mentor folks or just offer experience when people need it?
Yeah, I would say the first thing is you have got to be yourself, right? You have to be yourself and not what you see the partner at your law firm. You don't need to try to be like they are, or to do cross-examinations or direct examinations like them. You're you, so bring your experience, bring your talent, bring your skill set. You got through law school, you did all the things that you needed to do. So just be authentic, because then when you're authentic, you're much more credible. You're credible to juries, you're more credible to judges, and I think that that credibility comes across. You're much more persuasive. That's one thing. I would also say that you need to be, you need to recognize that you're going to make mistakes, right? And from those mistakes, that's okay. We make them every day of our lives. And so what do we do with those mistakes? Learn from them. Never, ever, as a young attorney, hide a mistake, because 98% of the time, any mistake that you make can be fixed. But if you don't let someone know what your mistakes are, then it's hard to fix that. I would say center your client, right? This is about your client. This is not about you winning or losing or your ego. That's one piece of it. Sure, we all want to win, but we really need to center our client. We need to listen to our clients. We need to listen to their lived experience. We need to try to put ourselves in their shoes, and we need to advocate for them in the ways that we're best able to, in conjunction with what's their lived experience. You've got to be impeccable with your word, right? You have to create realistic expectations. So if you say you're going to do something, follow through on that. Maybe you can't do it exactly when you said you were going to be able to do it, but let people know that they are on your radar, that they're valued, that their time is precious, and that you want to do the best job in the world for them. And so that's something else you need to do. And don't put hard deadlines on yourself that really are not realistic. So if you think you can get something done by Wednesday, then why don't you tell your client maybe you can get it done by Friday? And that way, if you deliver sooner, it makes you look great, right? There's so many things. Trust yourself. Trust yourself, which goes to being authentic. And then in conjunction with that, always be prepared, right? Because you never know what's going to happen. You may be in a courtroom and there's a fire alarm and you have to leave the courthouse and stand out, outside in the Texas heat. Some of these things have happened. So if you're prepared, then when those things happen, when something throws you for a loop, you can step right back in. So those are the things I would say right off the top of my head.
That's great advice. I think something else that I've observed with you that we've laughed about sometimes because people don't necessarily think about it, but the more you are around attorneys, you realize it's unfair to not think about it, but creativity. What would you say about being creative in the matters that you handle and the people that you interact with as your clients?
Yeah, I think there's so much of lawyering that really is creativity. It's looking at, you don't always have to go file a lawsuit. There are workarounds in so many different respects to getting from point A to point B, and it may mean that you're not going to go file a lawsuit right off the bat. You really have to think about, for most people, unless you're representing business clients, paying a lawyer is hard and very, very expensive. So you want to try to do those things that you can, whether it's initial outreach, whether it's trying to negotiate some sort of a settlement before you ever get to a court of law. Those are some of the things. I always think about it as workarounds. Be creative. Use those life skills that you've had your whole life, the things that you know about. If you were like me, I went to law school at night, I had a prior career, so I came to the practice of law with all of these skills. Don't leave those at the door, and don't leave yourself at the door, which goes back to the being authentic, which goes back to trusting yourself, which goes back to knowing that you're prepared.
That's all really great advice, and it leads directly into the next thing that I'd like to discuss with you, and particularly in light of the fact that this is June and it's historically known as LGBTQIA plus Pride Month, or LGBTQ Pride Month, or some iteration thereof. Maybe just Pride Month, right? And you are accomplished as an attorney who is specializing in LGBTQ law. In Texas, we know that there are no statewide protections for LGBTQ people. So in other words, classes that are protected include race, national origin, age, disability, etc., but LGBTQ people are not included in legal protections in Texas, nor are we in any federal legislation. Of course, there are protections through some other venues, court cases, EEOC rules, etc. But because of that and other reasons, which I know you'll elaborate on, what advice would you give to a queer lawyer of any age?
I think you really have to figure out, are you comfortable with being out? All right, that's the first thing. Are you comfortable with being out? And for any given lawyer, that's a really, really personal choice. It's a personal choice also because of where you practice. In Texas, what I experienced being in, for example, Dallas and Houston and Austin and San Antonio, a lot of inclusivity, a lot of diversity, a lot of acceptance. But when you get into the more rural parts of Texas, there's still a lot of, I guess I would say, homophobia, and so you have to determine, what it is that you want to do. When I first started practicing and I was a baby lawyer, after I'd worked at the court where I was not out, my very first law firm, when I went to go actually interview, I just told them straight out, I'm gay. Mm-hmm. And if you're not okay with that, this is not the place for me. And so it really depends. So that's one thing. As a queer lawyer, I would say, please go get involved. Go get involved in the bar. Go start volunteering for those things that you feel passionate about. I think we're going to talk a little bit more about this, but I think those volunteer opportunities that I started taking advantage of really made me feel like I fit in, and that I had found sort of my tribe, but also allowed me, someone like me, hopefully, I like to think that I can pass, right? And so when I was a baby lawyer, part of what I did was we represented car dealerships all over the country. Very traditionally family-owned and operated, run by men, and very often I didn't want to come out to them and tell them who I was. I can tell you, though, that there was one car dealer that we represented in a very conservative part of the country who confided in me that he was gay and that he didn't talk about it even with his family. And I said, well, I am too. So there's those spaces when you feel it's good to come out. But get involved in the bar, in those things that I think that helps us feel more included.
So in addition to that, I'd like to explore a little bit for those that don't have the same lived experience that you and I happen to have as out queer people. Why does it matter that someone who works at a firm or is in the practice of law is out? If it does matter, and I think you believe there are times when it does matter, but I wouldn't want us to miss the opportunity in this conversation to dispel what some people either would have as a myth or just haven't had the opportunity to think about, which is like, well, why is it even a thing? What are some of those issues that a person faces at work, either in making those decisions or in navigating through the other politics of working at a firm or a corporation or any other setting?
So I think the first thing I would do, which I didn't do properly here today, was to introduce myself with my pronouns. So I use she, her pronouns, and that's an example of when you're working for a firm. If you introduce yourself with your pronouns, then that gives other lawyers at your firm and staff at your firm a recognition that you are asking them for their pronouns. Nowadays, not everyone identifies with the pronouns that match the sex they were assigned at their birth. Right. And certainly for young lawyers, young people that I'm seeing, that I'm starting to work with more and more now, there are so many folks that identify as non-binary or gender fluid, right? And so when you introduce yourself that way, that's saying, hey, I'm a safe space. And I think that's what's so critical working at a firm, because you want to bring your family to the firm. When people ask you questions about what you did on the weekend, if you're not out or if you're hiding who you are, that is both taxing on you, but it's also means you're not being authentic. It means that the people, you're depriving the people at the firm of really truly knowing you. And so I think many firms right now are trying to be really more forward-looking. Right. And I think from a law standpoint, right, when you're in a firm, if you cultivate an atmosphere of inclusivity and acceptance, you can better represent your clients.
I think that's all really great advice, and I would ditto that from my observation. I mean, you and I both have lots of friends in firms, out and successful. We also have a lot of friends who are not comfortable being either fully or even at all out in their firms, and that goes to the culture. Right? So in addition to firms having inclusive policies on the book, non-discrimination statements on the books, sexual orientation is the absolute minimum, and it's also absolutely necessary to have gender identity and gender expression included in that as well. But we also have seen places where that's it, and then the culture doesn't match up. Right. So those things are so important, and as a matter of equity, and just doing the right thing, but also the demands of the workplace these days. Younger folks are asking for more, and rightly so.
I agree, and certainly, you know, for example, being able to come into your office and have the picture of your wife, yeah, you know, and your kid there, or on the forms that the law firm offers. You know, does somebody have a partner? Not every person who might consider themselves to be in a long-term same-sex couple, for example, wants to get married. And so not everyone wants to be married, but what can you do on your forms? Also, X markers, so a gender-neutral marker for someone. We now have that ability on passports because of a Lambda legal case that my colleague Paul Castillo, right here in our Dallas office, shepherded for the last 6 years, even though the United States has been accepting X markers on passports from other countries for years. So all of this is, I think, for our profession to grow, for us to be able to best serve our clients, we have got to recognize what is real for young people now and to cultivate that pipeline and to cultivate those experiences.
Well, I'm going to go out of order from what we had originally discussed, but this leads to something we were going to talk about, which is I am still astonished and amazed and inspired by you leaving the progression of law practice that you had and deciding to go get an LLM. And in doing that, I'm going to tell the audience a little bit of insider scoop here. So when Shelly moved to Los Angeles to attend UCLA, she had a 27-year-old roommate in college graduate housing, and the helicopters were constantly circling over your dorm. They weren't chasing you, but you were adjacent to the medical center. And let's see, what else was happening? Oh, the building always smelled like burned popcorn, because after all, you were in a dorm, right?
Right.
But here you are, you were decades older than a 27-year-old roommate, and it was quite a thing. But off you went, you got your hippie backpack, you're good to go. She's wearing a black suit today, but she has her Guatemalan hippie backpack. It's so very Shelly. So you did not know what you were going to do after you got your LLM, and I want to talk about your work at Lambda. But before that, what inspired you, led to, was the catalyst for you leaving a practice of law and deciding, I'm going to do an entirely new thing. That takes a lot of courage. So I'd like to know I'd like our audience to know what that was about.
And a lot of trips to Target with the top down on your convertible, because you can put so much in your car, including very tall people like Cece, who's about 6'1".
It was some fun times. Thank goodness LA has great weather and we could have the top down while I was under some sort of storage cabinet praying to make it alive back to the dorm. But anyway.
And we did. Despite the earthquake the very first night we were there. So there's that. I think, you get older in life and I think you start trying to figure out what's really important. And I had some things happen to me that made me evaluate, what do I want to do with the rest of my life? And I think it's fair to say, so I applied to divinity school. And I also applied to UCLA. It's the only school that had an LGBTQ concentration. And I wasn't really sure which one I wanted to do. And we'll maybe talk a little bit about mentorship, but some of the people that mentored me and helped me through that process. But it was really about being of service. It's about not being in your ego. It's about seeing your fellow man for who they are and hopefully making just one life a little bit better and making your own life a little bit better, I guess. And so I got into both, and UCLA offered me more money, and it was a shorter program, so I said, okay. So I packed up my house and drove out to California and went to UCLA, and it was one of the most joyous, fun experiences of my life for sure, and I would not trade it for a minute. And I think you have to figure out, what matters to you? Does money matter or does experience matter? And so to me, this was a life experience. Money is not for me, it's not a driver. And so one of my professors was Kimberly Crenshaw, right, who coined the term intersectionality in 1989. And I took her civil rights class. And that opened up my eyes in really, really, really profound ways that matched that need for why I went to UCLA, which was to be of service, to be able to do work for people who don't have, whose voices aren't heard, who aren't seen. And so having her as a professor was just amazing. And so she offers a great summer class that you can do as a lawyer and get CLE credits. So I try to do that every summer. And the networking that comes out of that with faith leaders and historians and lawyers and professors and just the gamut of people is amazing. I took human rights classes and learned about how truly, truly lucky we are here in this country. We have running water. We have a place to live. There are so many things that I learned at UCLA, and then I learned about technology and how much better young people are at it, and that yes, there is a thing called texting from being about 10 feet away from you. My roommate would text me and say, hey, do you want to go have pizza? And I'm like, we're in really small, tiny graduate student housing. You're right here, I'm right here. You could just talk to me, but that wasn't really always a thing. So,
so many life lessons, right?
Yeah, it was I think you always have to challenge yourself, right? We always have to learn and grow, and that's not easy. You have to be willing to go through the hardship of change, but we only have one shot. We only have one shot, and by God, for me, I want to be all in every piece of it. And Cece will say to everyone that I'm like the Energizer Bunny, but there's too much of life to live, there's too many experiences to have, and there's too many people that share their experiences with you that you can learn something that then help you as a lawyer help somebody else. And if you've got to be open to all of that.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I know that was such an incredibly special time and pivotal time for you. So let's talk a little bit about then. You've graduated, you are looking for a job, and I wish we had 5 hours for this interview. We don't. So I'll go directly to, I mean, if you want to talk about what you were thinking about, that's fine, but I want to make sure that the folks watching this get a chance to learn more about your work at Lambda and what Lambda does strategically and through its mission. So if you would give us some insight to that so that folks know about this amazing resource and amazing organization that has done things that have changed the law and created landmark rulings from the United States Supreme Court.
Right, so Lambda Legal, who I work for now, I'm a senior attorney with them, and which is not old, not to be confused with the living legend piece of this. I'm not sure about that, but okay. What we do, we're the oldest and largest national organization, like you said earlier, working for full and lived equality for LGBTQ people and people who are living with HIV and all of those people who are at the intersections. Right. So when you were talking about earlier the fact that we don't have, under state law, no non-discrimination protections, right? We have some through court cases with respect to, for example, the Bostock decision. And I won't go too far into all of that, but there's only less than 1/5 of our population has any protections, specifically enumerated protections in housing, in public accommodations, in employment, right? And so Dallas is one of those cities, but Houston, the 4th largest city in the country, is not. Right. And so what Lambda does is cases like Obergefell, cases like, which is marriage equality, cases like the Bostock decision, Lambda work—
Employment protection, right?
Right. Employment protections, which you had through the EEOC in 2013 and much earlier, but not across the board. Right. And that decision said that sex, wherever there is a prohibition on, or there's no discrimination based on sex, that sex includes sexual orientation and gender identity. 100 other federal statutes, housing, credit, there's so many things that decision also was one, all of the groundwork that Lambda had done over the years, starting in about 2013 with a case called Glenn versus Brumby, mm-hmm. Lawrence versus Texas, right? That looks at what I'm going to say, the right to make certain personal choices central to individual dignity and autonomy right. within a lawful realm. Those are all Lambda cases, the X marker on passports, being able to have a birth certificate that aligns with your gender identity, free speech and speech for GSAs, so gay straight alliances in schools. Just across the board, Lambda's done all of that work, and I think really frankly, I can say for
You're a living legend. You can say whatever you want.
Oh, yeah. But not alone, right? We've done it with all of our partners like NCLR, GLAAD, and so many different other organizations.
Thanks for letting. Yes, you totally answered my question. I think it's an opportunity for folks to learn more about Lambda, which is an amazing, impactful treasure.
Let me say one other thing too. It's not just impact litigation. We do public policy work, and we also do education. And part of what I do is go out into the community and try to humanize people who are LGBTQ, people who are living at the intersections. And so one thing I'll just say, you've heard me say this a million times, but in our state, 27% of people who identify as LGBT are food insecure. 26% of us do not have health insurance. 26% of us make less than $24,000 a year. And if you are a person of color who is also LGBTQ, 39% of us live below the poverty level in our state. That's not acceptable in the United States of America. There's so much work that needs to be done. And I invite anyone to come and join us, to reach out to me. Certainly if you are a lawyer that's working on a case and that's involving LGBTQ people, please reach out to a lawyer that specializes in that type of work, because there are things that you're maybe not going to be aware of that are a factor in cases that involve LGBTQ people. And we're at the forefront right now, right? Along with SB8, individual rights, that tension between religious liberties, fundamental due process, equal protection. That is what we're seeing with COVID, mask mandates. This is the wellspring or the groundswell of the law right now. It's changing very, very quickly.
So I know that you are involved in litigation right now. You're also doing something that you had not done previously in your practice, which is policy work. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because I think that's been really interesting and rewarding for you.
Sure. So I got sort of thrust into doing policy work for Lambda before the Texas legislature last year, which we had, as most people may or may not know, we had multiple legislative sessions. Our legislators left the state based on restrictions and what I would say voting rights. And so I was able to work on pieces of legislation, analyzing legislation, writing legislation, adding amendments to legislation, working with coalition partners on the ground, and lobbyists, folks like Equality Texas, Texas Freedom Network, Human Rights Campaign, Lambda Legal, ACLU of Texas, Transgender Education Network of Texas. Got to work with all of those folks all throughout all the sessions, late into the night, driving down. Cece drove down with me at 3:30 in the morning to go testify. But the thing that I think I learned most from all of that is the LGBTQ families, and especially the families who have trans kids, their willingness to show up and show up and show up every time to testify and tell their stories. I learned the power of a story, the power of humanizing another human being, and how that can change legislation. And right now, with the way that the courts are structured, we need legislation that protects all of us. It's not special rights. It's protecting all of us. And then especially for those parents with the trans kids coming and telling their story. It's hard. That's hard on people. And right now in our state, we saw last year more anti-LGBT bills filed in our state than any other state, over 75. More than half of those were anti-trans related. And so I would say to you, I would say to any person out there that's never met a trans person, that doesn't know anything about trans people, please go educate yourself. Go talk to people who are trans, who identify as non-binary or gender expansive, gender diverse, because these are amazing human beings and they're just like you and me.
Thanks, Shelly, for talking to us about that aspect of your work right now. And what do you think, given that the policy work is new for you, and you spoke about constantly doing new things. That's something that brings you joy. That's how you're wired, I think. Not everybody finds the same attraction to that. But for folks who aren't always thinking about how past skills, how they could do something totally new, because we get comfortable in our regular routines. What is it, do you think, that you had done in your previous practice, or that you learned along the way, that equipped you to be effective at policy work? Because that was a change.
Yeah, I think really just it's comes from advocating on behalf of your clients, and so it's really the same thing, but just in a different way. You're not in a courtroom. You're not examining witnesses, but you're telling a story. It's the power of telling a story. And so I think that was, and then relationship building, right? I think one other thing I would say for young lawyers is a couple of things. It's always about integrity, too. When you walk into a courtroom and you've got bad case law or you've got bad facts, then that's where you use your creativity. That's where you say, yes, you own up. You have to have that integrity. You distinguish the bad case law, because if you're not, you don't have that integrity in front of a judge. Judges talk to each other, and that harms your client. The person who gets harmed is your client, because you're not the person that has integrity. The other thing I would say for young people is never, ever, ever burn a bridge. If you don't agree with someone or you leave a law firm, there are people there that may become your allies in the future. And that's been the case throughout my career. People have shown up for me, and shown up for me, and shown up for me, and I have relied on their advice, their insight, their guidance. And so it's about relationship building. I think policy work is really, it's just that, building those bridges, finding that common ground.
And I think at the beginning of a person's career in law, or any other profession for that matter, that's something that you learn through experience. You have an experience early in your career, you make a judgment about the people you're interacting with. 10 years later, that might feel very different, right? You might see it through a different lens. You might encounter that person and have a different experience with them, or you may have changed so much that makes the experience different. So I think your point about not burning a bridge is really, really important, because we do, in this profession, in a community, it can feel very small. It can end up being very small, right? I mean, I bet you run into people in the courtroom all the time, when we used to be able to run into people in the courtroom, and I know things are opening back up now, but
Central Market, right?
Right.
It's a grocery store.
Right, the grocery store, the courtroom, wherever you go. I've seen it. I've seen you run into, or people walk up to you and remember you from something. So you never know when you're going to encounter somebody. And I don't want to use the word when you're going to need them, but to your point of people showing up for you, it's just impossible to predict. And so even when things happen that may feel crummy at some certain time in your career, maybe would you advise that people withhold judgment sometimes, or at least understand that with the passage of time and more development of their career, that maybe it's not so bad, or maybe it could look different later on?
Yeah, I think we all owe each other grace, right? We all owe each other, or I would hope. How I try to show up is to understand that, I'm not in this person's head.
Yeah.
I'm not in their shoes, and I don't know what's going on. We have to, in this life, maybe I'm getting a little too esoteric, but we have to be able to see each other. We have to recognize our value. We have to understand that we're all going to make different choices, and that's okay. It's not about us. If somebody makes a choice that we don't like, give people grace. We all grow, we all change, we get to do this together. We get to have those years and that time and that process together. And I think in being open to what can come of being open to someone, if you didn't agree with them in the past, can be so much greater than you're restricting yourself and shutting it off because something happened 10 years ago or 5 years ago.
Yeah.
You miss out.
Good advice. Good advice. So I know that you have done a lot of things. I touched upon them in the introduction a little bit, but I'd like to hear more from you about how meaningful it has been on a personal and a professional level for the ways and the places where you volunteered. And you have done things that I would categorize as more personal, but you have done a lot of things also that are very tied to the profession. ASC, mentoring students at UNT Dallas College of Law. I mean, there's a whole bunch of examples. There's a million things you've done, and you know what they are. So would you, would you talk some about, in the framework of sharing with others, ways that they can enhance their personal and professional parts of their life by volunteering and engaging in things in addition to, you know, their regular practice of law?
Yeah, I think I think we gravitate towards those things that we have a passion about, and so I think for young lawyers, sometimes when you're working for a big firm, right, you're working a ton of hours, and that consumes your life. But don't forget those things that you're passionate about, and then go and volunteer for that, whether it's here through the Dallas Bar Association and what they do for Habitat for Humanity. I started volunteering for things with the Dallas Bar Association, and then the Dallas LGBT Bar Association, which led to the LGBT Bar Association, which led to doing work with the state bar, which led to doing CLEs. I think for young lawyers to build a business, that's part of that relationship building. It's also make yourself an expert in something, whether it's an esoteric thing like a bill of review, or maybe it's handling probate cases for same-sex couples that maybe weren't married but look like would meet all the elements of a common law marriage. Start writing and speaking and making yourself an expert on a particular part of the law, and then recognize that other lawyers will start to refer cases to you. And it's those lawyers that you do volunteer work. Like all of ASC, I'm not near as active as I was when I was younger, but being a part of ASC and meeting older lawyers who were judges and mentors, and then walking through our law careers together and growing up together, and then going out and starting our own firms together, having those peer mentors because we all volunteered together. That just, it expands your network and it helps you be of service. And this is a little off tangent, but I'm going to say it anyway. I think we have a great responsibility as lawyers. We also, I think sitting with a client is a sacred space, right? They're entrusting you to have a voice for them. They're entrusting you with the most intimate parts of their lives and the things that most, whether it's a corporation, it's their people's ability to make a living. And so we owe it to be of service. And part of that is being out in the community and volunteering for those things that you're passionate about. And that will lead you to that greater network of people that become your lifelong friends. I mean, who knew that I would have, that I feel like I've made all these friends that we work together in common ways that they're my people, and I trust and I love them, and I'm so grateful for those relationships.
And they can just show up in the most amazing ways, right? Like things, you saying that reminded me that there was something you were really toiling over and you needed to figure it out quickly this week. And I think you had like a 10 p.m. or a 7 a.m. phone call with one of your go-tos. And that person is always there for you. That you all have done that for years and years and years. And no one feels like that person, when you rely on that person or need them, they don't feel like it's a burden because it's the trust that you all have built. And I know that you are there for that person too. So, I mean, we all are going to need, and we do need those people in our professions, right? And right. It's astonishing how those relationships get created over the years. Thank goodness. How joyful and amazing, right?
Yeah, I mean, thank goodness. I agree.
Yeah. So I want to ask you something that I hope will just be a blast. Tell us about your most exciting day as a lawyer.
I think I have two. But by far the most exciting was I had the opportunity to be in the courtroom during the oral arguments on the 𝐓𝐸𝐸𝐸 case. So marriage equality. So John Trevino, one of my long-term good buddies,
He seconds his Santa Claus in December, right?
He does. He doles out toys to kids, and he really does look very much like Santa Claus.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, what we did is we hired someone actually to stand in the attorney line for us for about 24 hours, and then we got there at about 3 in the morning. And it was cold, and you cannot get out of line, and you cannot go to the bathroom, and so.
And I know how you like your coffee, so this must have been an absolute dilemma for you.
It was pretty hard, but so we ended up being about the 50th and 51st lawyers that they actually let into the courtroom that day. So John and I got to sit in the United States Supreme Court and hear the oral arguments. And then walk out. We go back to, well, we were outside, from 3 in the morning until about 8:30 when we actually got to move out of the line, but we still were outside because oral arguments don't start until 10 in the morning. Just the sheer, right, so you have so much free speech. I think I saw every type of person. I saw, I'm going to not do this right, but I saw Jewish folks, I saw Orthodox Jewish folks, I saw Mormons, we saw people that were so for same-sex marriage, so against same-sex marriage, with blowhorns and taught people having conversations all night long across the path where all of the non-lawyers had a line as well. And it really just made me think how great this country is, the promise of the 14th Amendment, the promise of free speech, the promise to be able to have those dialogues, and then to sit in the courtroom, and then to walk out and have it be just a sea of people and people yelling and screaming, both ways, for and against. And I just thought, God, this is the coolest. This is why I became a lawyer, was to be able to be a part of this, even though I wasn't any part of the case, but just to be here and see that. Yeah. What a gift. And then so that would be the coolest thing. And then the day that the decision came down was just a whirlwind, starting so we had a whole cohort of us on the phone together as they were reading the opinion, which was being transcribed. So we had people from all over the country, and we're on the phone going, "Oh my God!" So there was that, and then that whole day, everybody running down to the courthouse and getting married. People who'd been together for 30, 40, 50 years, yeah. Right? And having that, and then you and I being able to get married, and how we really tried to make our ceremony be a recognition of how important marriage is. And I'm not saying that's the only right that LGBTQ people have found to be so profound, but it is a recognition of those relationships that you have with other people in your life that I think is so profound.
Right, and the fact that it had only been 6 years at the time that we had the legally recognized status of marriage. It was profound to both of us.
Right.
Well, those are great experiences. You've had an amazing career, and will continue to have one for sure. I know there are some other questions we talked about, and we have some more time here. A little bit. We don't have a ton, but we have a little bit. So,
want to tell the story about being in a a very conservative space.
If you want to.
When you and I were dating, and we went to a very conservative county.
So this is about navigating the spaces that we find ourselves as LGBTQ people.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So here's the story. So I had been really out in my career. I think being out for me has been really critical. I think it's for other people to see people who are out and recognize that that person is really just like me. They have the same wants and desires, and so being out, I think, is one reason why marriage equality was something that was able to happen, because I think people can relate to that. So despite being out, having done all the work I'd done, been the president of the Dallas LGBT bar, the state bar LGBT law section, pretty much being out everywhere all the time, you and I went to an event in a very conservative county. I had done some mock trial work with high school kids, and we were going to meet the mayor and city council. And we were dating, but we were pretty serious. And the mayor came over, and we got introduced to the mayor, and here I am. I introduced Cece as my buddy. Those were the exact words, my buddy, not my partner, which you were at the time.
I had never even heard you use the word buddy before. I'm like, what, is there a dog around here? Or what's happening? All right, go ahead, please. Continue, counsel.
So here I'd been out, I practiced law for 20 plus years and was really, really out, but I didn't feel safe in that space, and I also didn't want to make this event be about the fact that I was the gay person in the room, or that Cece and I were the gay people in the room. It was meant to be there for the high school students that we were mentoring and working with. And so and when we got in the car that night, you said to me, "What was that?" And I didn't even really realize I had done that. So it's like a knee-jerk reaction of still trying to cloak yourself in safety. That happened there. So I think maybe that story will help people recognize that even when you're out, it's not always easy to be out. And yeah.
I appreciate you sharing that for the audience that could be watching this, because what was so fascinating to you and I think, and I have found myself in the exact same place before, is how we as LGBTQ people can feel as though we are in situations where we absolutely have to be in the closet. And we can snap into that at the drop of a hat because we don't feel safe. And that's the significance of having that awareness in a work environment, whether it's a firm or a corporation or anywhere else, right? That the culture has to allow for us to show up as our full selves. So thank you for sharing that. I think we are close to time, or ticking down the time, but congratulations on your designation as a living legend. I have not known you the entire time you've had your career in the practice of law, but to the extent that I have observed and know you and admire you, I am so grateful to have this opportunity to have visited with you, but to help you share your story with others, because I know you're an inspiration to many, many people and will continue to be so, and that a lot of people have helped you along the way too, and they're proud of you. So congratulations, Shelly Skeen, and keep on doing a great job and making this profession so proud of you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Grateful.